Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, student debt and college affordability are huge issues, not only nationally, but in the state as well. But first, new voting procedures will be in place when we all go to the polls on April 28th. We'll take that up and other subjects, and we'll do that after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, well, let's take up. There are new voting procedures in place that will affect all of us when we go to vote on April 28th in the Pennsylvania primary. We also have new machines. I want to get into that, and joining me to talk about that and more is John Micek. He's the editor-in-chief of Pennsylvania Capital Star and an associate editor at this aforementioned publication, Cassie Miller. They joined me to get into them. Well, Cassie, let me talk with you. New voting machines, the counties are going through the process of purchasing them, and there's a big debate about who's paying for them. I don't know if we want to get into that. But I think for most of us who turn out to vote, we're going to have new voting machines. There has to be a verifiable paper trail. That was perhaps the biggest aspect of the change because of, what's that called? Oh, Russian interference and other countries interfering in our elections. So what do our viewers want to know when they turn out to vote on April 28?
So the biggest thing is all of the counties, per Act 77 and Governor Wolf's request, had to choose, the county election officials had to choose new voting methods for each of their counties. So it is county specific. So the State Department actually launched this week a website it's called Ready to Vote. You go in, there's a little drop down, you find your county, and it'll give you step-by-step instructions of what method they chose and how to operate, how to use it. For instance, I live in Lebanon County, and when I went in, you can see that ours are paper ballots. They've chosen paper ballots, and then it goes about the scanning machine.
Scan them, you run them through a scanner, but you have the paper ballots as the backup, right?
Exactly. So it's up to each county to kind of choose what machine they wanted to use. So it is county specific. So it's really important going into the primaries and eventually the general election to be informed about what you're going to see when you get there, because it might be a significant change. It might be not a change at all, depending on what county chose what. So.
And one of the other things is early voting. I mean, now you can vote by mail for any reason. And John, there's real concern that at the end of the day on April 28th, particularly if we're in some hot contests, and there'll be congressional races and state legislature. We'll have to see what happens in the big Pennsylvania primary. But it could take a while to tabulate. That's a growing concern.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that state officials are concerned about. It's a fine problem to have. There's a lot of people participating in the election. They've made it easier for people to vote. So as a consequence, it sounds like a lot more people are going to participate in this voting through mail. To prepare for that, House Majority Leader Brian Cutler, Republican of Lancaster, said on Monday that they're positioning bills, that is, in the State House, that could authorize the early opening of those ballots in advance of the polls closing at 8 o'clock, but not the tallying of them, so that things will function relatively smoothly. They're trying to prepare for that. Two other developments, Terry, that are worth noting. Our friends at the PA Post reporting this morning that a Commonwealth agency has agreed to the $90 million in bonds that Governor Wolf requested to help counties defray the cost of these new voting machines, because they're being asked to replace old machines with new devices, and that's a monster cost.
And they're not cheap, right?
No, they're not cheap. The other thing is there are now cases pending both in federal court in Philadelphia and in Commonwealth court challenging the certification of one specific voting machine that was used in Northampton County and in York County last November, where it ended up being just a nightmare in tabulating all of the votes. This being Pennsylvania, of course, things can never run entirely smoothly.
So what you're suggesting is if that works out, let's say unfavorably for the counties, they might have to get new machinery when the folks in those two counties go to vote. Is that correct?
Correct. And voting rights advocates and voting security advocates say that these machines are the most expensive and least secure that the state could have bought. They've asked for those to be decertified.
Is there a degree of nervousness out there among county officials? I mean, I think the average voter, and I include mine, I'm sure you are there too, we just go and vote. I mean, we're not heavily invested in, well, what's going to take place once we go in. We go in and expect to get a tally or a paper ballot or go punch a card or do something. Is there growing concern?
It definitely seems that way, not across the board, but when we were watching them choose, their new methods, their new machines, how they were going to move forward with the new voting procedures, some counties jumped right on it and were a little bit more enthusiastic and were on top of it, and then other counties took quite a while up until last few months of 2019 to end up choosing a voting machine or a new method. So I think there is some hesitation there for sure.
Okay, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'll tell you what, the millions are starting to flow into Pennsylvania. Who knows if our primary and the presidential nomination battle on the Democratic side will really matter by the time we get to April 28th, but I'll tell you, we are going to be one of the critical states in the fall election for the presidency of the United States, and the money is already starting to flow into our state. We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, we're going to talk about the importance of Pennsylvania in this year's presidential primary, perhaps on April 28th, but obviously the fall election. I'm chatting with John Micek and Cassie Miller from Pennsylvania Capital Star. All right, John Micek, let's talk about that big money coming in. The candidates are here. They've been here even though, we're a little far off yet for our primary.
Yeah, you and I were chatting about that during the break, whether this is still going to be litigated by the time everyone rolls into town in April. And it's anyone's guess. I guess we'll find out the topography after Super Tuesday. But, Terry, we are seeing massive spending now by interest groups across the spectrum in the run-up to the fall election already. Just this week, SEIU, Service Employees International Union, the massive service workers union, announced a $150 million spend nationwide, targeting 8 battleground states. Pennsylvania, with 20 electoral votes, is chief among those battlegrounds. President Donald Trump, as you well know, only won the state by less than a percentage point in 2016, and it's going to be a street-by-street fight for those votes in November. We've seen a $45 million spend by Planned Parenthood. Priorities USA, one of the largest Democratic super PACs, announced a TV buy this week. The actor and activist Alyssa Milano is raising money in the state. Everyone is here. Everyone's raising money.
Are we going to have any regular TV? I'll let you wait. Are we going to see any shows? Or are they going to be?
It was all Mike Bloomberg commercials during the hockey game last night, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Oh, plus they had, on the debate that took place last week, Michael Bloomberg, they actually ran his commercials during the debate. Did you watch that?
I did.
Now, is that seems strange. I mean, obviously they can buy them, but I just thought that was strange, running commercials for a candidate who's on the debate stage.
I think it really shows just the competitive spirit of this primary in particular. Everyone's really neck and neck and kind of vying for, the top tier, to be a top tier candidate, and I think Bloomberg jumping in a little late compared to everybody else has that catch up to play. So
yeah, John, I don't think there's any doubt that we know the importance of our state in the fall. We're going to be one of the top 4 or 5 states. Some actually say we could be the top state. And the fact of the matter is that we still yet don't know on April 28th whether we'll be relevant or not. Let's chat a little bit about that. The fact of the matter is, if we do matter, even if it looks like, let's say, Bernie, who has a lead right now, continues to hold that lead, is Pennsylvania too important overall, and when we get into the fall, for the candidates to skip?
Oh, absolutely. We're seeing that now. Terry, your polling from about a month or so back showed the former Vice President Joe Biden leading the Pennsylvania primary PAC. We saw polling data over the weekend from the University of Wisconsin showing Senator Sanders now at the front of the primary pack, just suggesting how volatile this race is even within the course of 6 weeks. And this Sanders surge that we saw coming out of New Hampshire and now Nevada. By the time this show goes on the air, we'll have already the South Carolina primary will have already been decided, and Super Tuesday will be beckoning. So things could be dramatically different. But I think there's no doubt that when it comes to the nomination, that Pennsylvania is going to play a pivotal role, and it's without question the state plays a pivotal role in the general election.
I think the Democrats, first of all, that was perhaps the most chaotic debate, completely out of control, and I've watched them all for 40 years, or virtually all of them. And the fact of the matter is that the Democratic nomination process has now become ground zero, battleground zero, let me put it that way, between the center left on the one hand and the progressives on the other. Is that likely to change, or is it looks like it's still heating up, doesn't it?
It certainly looks that way, and I think as we're getting closer and down to the wire, we're starting to see little fissures of, where Warren and Sanders separate, where Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar separate, and seeing those little differentiations that are going to make a big difference later on in the rest of the year. So.
Final comment?
Look, the Democrats want to beat Donald Trump.
Really?
Period. Well, no, but the reason that's important is will they coalesce around the eventual nominee? If Senator Sanders emerges as the eventual nominee, will that centrist wing represented by Buttigieg and Klobuchar
Looks like they
follow
will,
that?
right?
That is presumably the case, but we're in this very fractious time right now.
Good point. All right, thanks for the great update. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about education. We've got education scholarships, education funding. This is all very important, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Well, if you followed the presidential election, and most of you have, you know that student debt has become a huge issue in the presidential election, but it's also something of an issue in the state of Pennsylvania, where Governor Wolf has a new scholarship program that he's put into the budget recommendation to the state legislature. We have that subject and a couple of others to talk about. Joining me to do that is John Tintera. He's a student at Millersville University of Pennsylvania. And of course, Dr. Ken Mash, he's the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, and a political science professor at Kutztown University. East Stroud. I'm getting it. I was just going to see if you knew. Yeah, at East Stroud, if you knew where you were from. Yeah. All right, let's get down to serious business. The whole business of student debt has become a big issue, and Governor Wolf is trying to address it in the state with a $200 million scholarship program. Talk about that program.
So the program right now, $204 million, would be a needs-based scholarship program that would go to students with an understanding also that for the number of years that they receive the scholarship, that they would remain in Pennsylvania. And
so don't take our money and leave.
That's right. So it's but we need educated workers in Pennsylvania, and this is extremely important. And we're just, from our position, we've been talking about this issue of student debt for a long time, and we're really happy that the governor has put this forward and is trying to take some action.
All right, John, you're the student here. Actually, we're all students. We're lifetime students. But I thought it was really important to have someone who faces the real challenges of student debt, and you do, and explain your situation to our audience and why this program could be of help to not just you, but to many of the other students in the public universities in the state.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I'm not alone in that student debt is becoming an ever burdensome factor in going to college. I think there are some folks who might not actually be able to go to college because of the student debt that they might incur over the course of the 4, 5, 6 years that they attend. I know, personally, I have a lot of friends who have to work full-time jobs while taking a full course load. So that becomes, when you're taking classes all day, and then you're working in, a food service business from 4 to like 2 a.m. every day. I mean, that can be tiresome, as well as they're not going to be able to perform to their highest ability academically.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of areas where, if there is some relief on that end, and I think it's really comforting to see, from a student perspective, to see folks in Harrisburg talking about this as an issue that we as a state face. And like you said earlier, it's not just here in Pennsylvania, but it's all throughout the
one of the interesting things, the published figure, $37,000 in student debt. There may be, I'll ask Ken in a few minutes, there may be a higher estimate out of another organization. But is there real worry that you graduate from a college, a public university in this state, and you end up having to take 10 years or so to pay the debt off when you're trying to get out of school, get a job, maybe rear a family at some point and go through that whole process? I mean, is that personally on your mind? How about that?
I think it's definitely one of the things that is on my mind. I think that there's a variety of different factors and pressures when you are going to school, especially once I'm graduating in May. So, thinking about, okay, where am I going to get a job? Am I going to be able to then afford, all the things that come along with that? If you need health insurance, if you need to pay off your student loans, and that just becomes an added bill.
You need a place to live.
You need a place to live. You have to pay rent. You might have car insurance and things like that. So, I mean, I think it just becomes an added pressure to an already long list of bills after you graduate.
Yeah. Well, what's the prospects that this will pass? I mean, I think the idea itself is popular. The race fund situation has created a bit of a controversy. And again, I'm surprised that the governor just didn't say, out of a $36 billion budget, take $204 million out and be done with it. Go ahead.
All right. This is geared at the state system. We, of course, have been supportive of the Pennsylvania Promise, which would have done this for community colleges and for state-related universities, too. We're in it. We just believe college should be affordable.
Yeah.
And we believe that this generation of students should be entitled to what previous generations got, and that it was an affordable, high-quality education. And the lack of funding for the state system really has led to increases in tuition and in fees, and has made education less accessible to people.
All right, we're going to run to a break. We come back. There are a couple subjects I want to talk to you about, maybe coronavirus, and I mean, it's important everywhere, and the state system redesign. We have a bunch of subjects we'll cover in the final segment of the program.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, I want to thank John for coming on and giving his perspective. The student perspective on this is very important, and we don't often hear it. I'm delighted that he could be here. Ken Mash still joins me. We got a couple of other topics. Let's talk quickly about the coronavirus. It's seeped into virtually every aspect of American life, into workforce, and when you're talking about college campuses, you got students coming from all over the world, students leaving, going back home. Mm-hmm. It's complicated on college campuses because of the mobility.
Yeah, I think that we have a right to expect that the leaders on the campuses, on all the campuses in Pennsylvania, will be proactive in trying to make sure that that the students are safe and protected.
Yeah, I'll tell you, the one thing before I move on is I just hope that this doesn't degenerate into politics. That of all the things we're doing, I mean, Democrats and Republicans, let's forget the party label and just work together. We want government to work together to protect the American people and forget the politics of it.
Yeah, I agree. There's certain crises which should not be politicized. We're talking about life and death situations.
Absolutely.
And everybody should be pulling in the same direction to make sure that the population's safe and protected.
Good point. All right, the future of the public universities. There are fewer than 100,000 students in the system right now. There's deep concern about whether the student population will be there. There's no doubt about the quality of these schools. That's been tested over time. So where does it all go?
Well, fundamentally, the system is being funded as if it's 2007. So the amount of money that's going to the system is really totally inadequate. And because of that, the students have had to bear more of the burden as far as through tuition and fees.
And we just heard the debt.
We just heard that, and that increases student debt. And it also means that we are losing students, and when we look at where we're losing students from, it's primarily from those students from families in the lower economic scale,
right,
as far as income goes. So, those are the students I think that we are fundamentally meant to serve at the Commonwealth's public universities. We're supposed to be the universities for the working class. And so, it really needs to be affordable, and the ripple effects of that are tremendous, because when you talk about student debt and you realize that, we have $68 billion in outstanding student debt in Pennsylvania, that's money that otherwise would be going to the economy. And if we just put it in stark terms that, hey, if we can get $30 billion back into the economy in Pennsylvania by taking action, in other circumstances, policymakers would jump on that. This is a really an emergency situation.
But what's the attitude of lawmakers? I mean, there are a lot of Pennsylvania state lawmakers that have these colleges and universities in their districts, and they're often, the other aspect is they're often the big employer in a region, so they serve a bunch of purposes.
They do, and and on top of that, the universities, as far as public expenditures go, the estimates are about 11 to 1. So for every dollar that's spent by the Commonwealth, $11 goes back into the state and local
into the economy, right?
There, the attitude is, I think, as with many things in Pennsylvania, it's about choices that need to be made about funding, and. You pointed out that the governor was looking to the horse racing fund for his program, and I know that you have written about the tax system in Pennsylvania and how hard it is to actually raise revenue that way. And as we struggle along and have to make these hard choices, we just can't go on being penny wise and pound foolish. We have to understand what the ramifications of public policy are.
Yeah. Before I let you go, what's the prospect that the $200 million for these scholarships will end up getting through the legislature? And I know you're connected to a lot of lawmakers and interact with them. What's the prospect?
Well, I think that the idea of having a scholarship program is resonating with legislators, and they understand, are beginning at least to understand the ramifications of the debt situation in Pennsylvania. Whether it comes out of that fund or comes out of some other place, we're hopeful. Whether, it may not happen this year, maybe it'll happen next year. All I can tell you is that we are going to, and the students will do everything they possibly can.
All right, thanks for coming on. Appreciate the update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.